Hi there, and welcome to this video on GCSE Biology, focusing on variation and evolution, and in particular on the topic of selective breeding. I'm Shumina from StudyMind, where we help you revise GCSE Biology with our helpful video tutorials, tailored to your subject, your specification, and to you. If you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe button. Whilst you are watching, please leave any comments below if you're unsure about anything, and let us know if it's your first time watching our videos so we can send you our free revision materials. We also have helpful timestamps below for each part of the video to help guide you through the specification. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to this tutorial on selective breeding. So we've already had a look at variation and evolution, and this really nicely ties into how we can select for advantageous characteristics in the process of selective breeding. So first of all, we'll have a look at why it might be useful to use selective breeding. We'll then have a look at the actual mechanism of it, and then we'll discuss some positives and negatives of selective breeding. So these are our tutorial points for today. So as per usual, just make sure that you've covered all of these points and understand all of these points by the end of the tutorial. So selective breeding involves choosing plants and animals with the best traits. So for example, an example of a good trait might be plants that have a higher yield, so therefore they produce more crop. And we select these plants and animals and breed these advantageous organisms more. So in this way, we are selecting for the particular genetic characteristic that we like, and we're breeding for this particular genetic characteristic. So these characteristics can help the organism in many ways. So for example, we can breed plants which are resistant to cold weather to improve production by crops in the winter, for example. Now, humans have been doing this for thousands of years. So farmers often find wild crops or wild animals with good traits and then breed them to produce lots of their own plants and animals with the desired characteristics. So we expand this trait within the population. Now, just note that selective breeding is different to genetic engineering. So in genetic engineering, we're actually changing the genetic composition of the animal or plant. But in selective breeding, we're not directly going into the genes and changing the composition of the genes. We're simply taking a step back, looking at which animals or plants we want to select, and selecting those and breeding them together, and therefore increasing the frequency of the particular characteristic that we like within that population. So all sorts of crops are selectively bred. So this might include corn, peaches, and bananas. And they are bred selectively for many beneficial characteristics. So there's millions of examples here, but we'll just have a look at a few. So for example, larger fruits. These might be more attractive to consumers, for example. Or resistance against disease. It's obviously a big loss to a farmer if their crop or their herd of animals dies out against a very common disease. So this is a really important trait. And also greater aesthetic beauty, such as larger flowers or more unusual flowers. Now, animals are bred selectively to increase the changes of certain characteristics. So these might include, the chances of certain characteristics. So these might include increased meat yield, increased milk yield, large eggs from chickens. So similar ideas between animals and plants. We're looking at yields or quality of the product. Also, desirable characteristics in domestic dogs can be bred for, such as a gentle, more docile nature. So, the exam questions that you get on selective breeding often ask you to apply these kind of like generalised theories that we're going through in this tutorial to specific concepts that they introduce to you in the exam. So that might sound a bit unnerving just because you won't have seen these examples before, but really all you need to know is these basics that we're going to go through now, and that will make the exam questions really, really easy because you just apply the basics to your exam questions. Okay, so let's have a look at the mechanism behind selective breeding. So first of all, we choose parents with the desired characteristics. So if you were trying to breed cows with a high yield of milk choose a cow that has a high milk yield and a bull whose mother has a high milk yield. So they must be from a mixed population. We then breed them together. So by breeding our selected parents together, the parents both have the desired genes, and hence the offspring will also gain the desired genes. So an example here, so we have a farmer who has a crop of plants. His crop produce keeps suffering because of pests, for example, which eat and ruin his crops. So he has 5 crop fields that you can see here, and only the crops in field 4 survived the pests. So that means that we're going to want to select for this crop here, because this is the one that survived the pest infestation, and it's the one with the desired characteristics because it had some kind of resistance. Whereas these ones did not have this resistance gene. Sorry, that should say 5 there, it says 4. So we select for this crop here. We then breed the offspring with the desired characteristics. So therefore, Harry the farmer, for example, picks out crops from field 4 and breeds these together. And the offspring will have the genes to help them survive the pest attack. So breed the selected parents together, they both have the desired genes, and hence the offspring will also gain the desired genes. Now, not all of the offspring that will have the characteristics that are selected for. Therefore, you only choose the desired offspring, and you then breed these together. So we continue this process, breeding together our offspring which have our desired characteristics. The next generation of crops will have more resistant crops because they will have the genes from the crops in field 4 of generation A, and we keep going as so. So just keep in mind that you can selectively breed for more than one characteristic at a time. So for example, Harry the farmer could have picked crops which are resistant to pests and also resistant to cold weather. Okay, so we don't have to pick one characteristic at a time. Okay, so now let's come on to discuss some positives and negatives of selective breeding. So first of all, there is an economic benefit here. So this is your really obvious point. So if a farmer can grow the crops with the largest fruits and the animals with the greatest yield of meat, they will get the most money. And this in turn aids the economy as their products will be of a greater quality and thus the consumer will also be happier. So we have our economic benefit there. Now, selective breeding, as I mentioned earlier, is also really good in selecting for more docile household pets or animals that are safer to farm with or safer to keep in the house. And we can also use selective breeding to prevent disease. So disease amongst crops can be very detrimental to crop yields. So by using selective breeding, we can select crops that are resistant to disease. Okay, so those are your 3 selective breeding positives that you need to remember. Now selective breeding negatives. So we might unintentionally select for rare diseases. So some of the more selected for organisms may have unexpected disadvantages, and they may be accidentally selected for. So for example, in breeding boxers, boxer dogs, this has led to breathing difficulties for this dog breed. So this is an example in which selective breeding has led to a disadvantage for the boxer population. And also, by selecting for specific alleles, we're actually reducing the genetic variation in a population. And by reducing genetic variation within a population, we're making that population more susceptible to be attacked by a disease, because within the population there's going to be fewer alleles, and therefore there's a lower chance that organisms will survive a disease spreading through the population, because a specific organism may not be resistant because they've all been selected for the same characteristics. So reduced genetic variation can reduce defences of the animals and plants against disease and insect attacks. This can actually end up wiping out a whole species. So now let's have a look at some practice questions. So I'll read through the statements and then you can pause the video and decide which are true or false, and we'll go through the answers after that. So A, selective breeding can be used to produce larger eggs in chickens. B. An advantage of selective breeding is reduced genetic variation. C. Selective breeding has the disadvantage of domesticating animals. And D. Selective breeding is a new process. Okay, so pause the video here, and in a few moments we're going to go through and talk about which answers are true or false and why. Okie dokie. So A is true. We know that selective breeding can be used to select for advantageous characteristics. Here it's producing larger eggs, which might be more attractive to the consumer. B, an advantage of selective breeding is reduced genetic variation. Absolutely false. We know that that is a disadvantage of selective breeding, reduced genetic variation, and this can actually lead to a whole species being wiped out if a disease attacks the population. C, selective breeding has the disadvantage of domesticating animals. False, because this is an advantage. And D, selective breeding is a new process. No, perhaps the definition of it might be a newer term, but actually it's been around for thousands, millions of years, more than that, because farmers would have noticed which crops or animals were more likely to survive through attacks of disease or cold weather, and would have breeded those together, and therefore, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, undergone the process of selective breeding. Okay, brilliant. So well done for today. That's all our tutorial points covered, and I'll see you for the next session. Thanks for watching this free video from StudyMind. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to catch our newest videos by clicking below, and leave a comment on a topic you'd like a video on. Click here to watch more videos in our series for GCSE Biology, or visit our website studymind.co.uk for free past paper compilations by topic and specification.